I'm going to go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau. Andy Staples joins us right now. He writes at The Athletic. He is host of the Andy Staples Show. It's available on podcast. You can watch it on YouTube, all of those things. Andy, always good to catch up. Thanks for a few minutes this afternoon. Before we get into Mike Leach stuff, need your help. You're good at this. Brian Haydad is taking a pre-Christmas family vacation. They are going to St. Louis, and I feel like a recommendation on an eating establishment would be a good idea.
Well, Pappy's Barbecue is the place that has the fabulous ribs in St. Louis, so that's probably one place you want to stop. And then you go up that there's an Italian section of town where they do all the toasted ravioli and all that. So you want to go and have some of that too, but Pappy's Smokehouse, I believe, is the name of the official name of the barbecue place.
There you go. The Italian, that's on the hill, right? Isn't that what they say?
Hill, yes. I was because St. Louis is the hill, and then Providence, Rhode Island is Federal Hill, and it's both really good Italian restaurants. It's they're kind of their Italian neighborhood, and so I even though they're not anywhere near one another, you get it mixed up because the names are so similar.
So you have written about Mike Leach this week. You have talked about him on SiriusXM. You've talked about him on your show. He was a guy that had a zest for life and turned out to be a heck of a football coach to go along with it. When you think about Mike Leach, where do you start?
It's hard for me because I almost feel like there's two different people. There's the person who had all these incredibly broad interests and was getting into all these wacky misadventures. Like there's a story I told on the podcast that he told me one time when he was at Valdosta State, he was recruiting Jacquez Green, who's a wide receiver. I think Quez played quarterback in high school though, but a really good athlete out of Fort Valley, Georgia, so up near Macon. And Quez ended up playing for Florida. So this is how good of an eye Mike had for these guys. But Mike, if you look at a picture of Mike from the early 90s and mid-90s, and then look at a picture of Vince Gill from the same period, they look exactly alike. And so Mike goes to the Hooters in Macon while he's on the trip recruiting Jacquez Green, and the waitress thinks that he is Vince Gill and he just doesn't say anything. And I think he went back a couple more times, and she's convinced that she was serving Vince Gill every single time.
Jeez. And he never corrected her.
Exactly.
Did he ever break out in song? That would be good to know.
It's like, now we're coming off tour or anything like that. But yeah, that's the story, one of the stories he told me. And, but then you've got the football coach who, if you think about it, every non-triple option team at every level of football uses parts of his offense. Whether the coach says they subscribe to it or not, it is filtered through. It is extremely main. I mean, everybody has some version of mesh. Everybody has some version of Y-stick. Everybody.
Yeah. And, it's funny. We were talking about this and kind of his impact on the game. And, he and Hal Mumme. It's crazy when you think about inventing something, right? I mean, when you think about true innovators, you think about a guy like Steve Jobs. But the idea of creating something that didn't exist before it really doesn't happen all that often. And yet Hal Mumme and Mike Leach together built this offense that if you talk to people who played against them in the late 80s and then through the 90s and then into the late 90s as it was evolving, they will tell you to a person, we've never seen concepts like this before at any level, and would study them and still not know exactly what they were looking at.
And in that comparison, it's interesting because Hal Mumme might be the Wozniak, where he may have started out as the brains of the outfit, had the original idea.
Yeah.
But Jobs took it further than anybody ever dreamed, and I think that's what happened with Leach. All you need to know is look at Mumme at Kentucky after Leach left,
right,
and then look at Leach, and so it's crazy how that worked. So because obviously Hal Mumme was critically important, and if Hal Mumme, look, if Mike Leach never goes to BYU as a student, then that's not on his resume when he sends it to Hal Mumme at Iowa Wesleyan. And Hal Mummy doesn't go, oh, this guy's – and it's funny because he hadn't coached at BYU. He didn't play at BYU, but this guy breathed the same air as Lavelle Edwards for 4 years. So I'll hire him. And also, well, Mummy also said, and this is perhaps my favorite part of that hiring story, he didn't think Mike had any preconceived notions about offensive line play, and that was an attractive quality.
I mean, it's almost kind of like the guys that, use the stall 2 doors down from Sean McVay.
Exactly. But
it was in the same air. We've got to capture this guy.
The fact that Dana Holgorsen is there as a player, like, it's just sometimes people are destined to meet. And that's just how it all worked with these guys.
So it's really fascinating to me because as this past season went along, as we were talking about Mississippi State games, I mean, one of the things that Brian Haydad just beat the drum on was like, run the football. I get that it's the air raid, but run the ball. I was doing a Houston game on TV earlier this year and was talking with Dana Holgorsen about, air raid. He's like, they kicked me out of the air raid club a long time ago. He's like, the Pirates the only one who still runs it. He stuck with it in its most pure form almost all the way through. I mean, there were a few exceptions, but not many.
Yeah, the Arkansas game this year would have been the biggest exception I can think of.
Well, and then Ole Miss at the end.
That's true. And I do think I think that was a bit of stubbornness on his part. Because I remember the first time I met him in person, I went down to Key West to interview him. This was between getting fired by Texas Tech and getting hired by Washington State. And he was hosting radio shows for SiriusXM and just, living his best life.
Yeah.
And we were in a bar, and I said, okay, I've always wanted to ask you this question because I played offensive line. I see your nuclear wide line splits, like because they're like 7 feet apart in some places. I was like, what would you do if I just took out my entire front seven and put all DBs on the field and lined up a DB, not even a 3 technique or a 1 technique or anything like that, just like straight up in the gap, and just told him to run as fast as he can through that gap and hit the quarterback. And he's like, well, I just run every play. And I'm like, but would you? Would you do
it? We have wondered similar things out loud on this radio program over the last couple of years. Maybe, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but I don't think it was on anybody's radar around here that Mississippi State was going to announce today that Zach Arnett was going to be the head coach. I certainly don't think it was a stretch to think that it was going to happen. I don't know if anybody thought it was going to happen yet. What do you make of that decision that the president of the university, Mark Keenum, made because they also don't have an athletics director right now?
Yeah, I was going to say, as a longtime Bracky Brett fan, I kind of hope it means that Bracky's getting a job. But, I know that Jared Benko, who's at Georgia Southern now, would be a candidate for that job. And so I do wonder how much of it is just continuity. And I'm curious what Zach thinks about offensive philosophy long term, because the thing that I thought, and so many things stink about all of this. I mean, Sharon loses her husband, their kids lose their father, their grandkids lose their grandfather, and the college football world is robbed of the joy that would have been a retired Mike Leach holding forth on everything. But another thing that stinks is with any coaching change you have upheaval and philosophical changes that cause the roster to get shaken up. And so I was hopeful and remain hopeful that this means that Zach Arnett maybe keeps the same offensive philosophy and just hires someone to run it that way, or promotes someone on the staff to continue running it this way. And obviously we've seen the air raid is pretty malleable. Like, you can work with this foundation and do different things. You look at Lincoln Riley, he added power to the air raid. And, they run the ball a ton at USC. But the foundation is the same. Dana Holgorsen jokes that he's kicked out of the air raid, but that doesn't mean the foundation of his offense isn't the same offense. He just likes to run the ball more. He likes to use the tight end more often. So you can build off what this is. It doesn't have to be a complete roster flip on that side of the ball. And I hope it's not, because I just don't want to see any more upheaval because of this than there has to be.
And it makes you wonder if a guy like Seth Luttrell, who's no longer at North Texas but is an air raid guy, might make sense. I know Cole Kubelik earlier today wondered out loud about Chris Hatcher, who's at Samford and is an air raid guy. So
that's it. Yeah, Hatch is one that was a hot name for potential bigger head coaching jobs for a long time, and then it fizzled out, and then he wound up becoming a very good head coach at Samford. But let's be honest, an SEC coordinator job pays a heck of a lot more than head coach at Samford.
No question about that. Andy, the time is always too short. Appreciate you jumping on with us and sharing some of your Mike Leach stories, and look forward to catching up with you soon.